Hello, Pandooranauts. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host or co-host, Paul Cradle, and this is the other host.
Miles Gray, nice to see you again, Pandora Knots. Hello, Paul. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Miles. Um, so I guess a good place to start off would be to explain where you are right now. Sounds like a
Yes,
very
well,
religious place.
I'm currently standing in a city called Yerushalayim, or in English, Jerusalem. And how about you?
Right now I'm in the Philippines at nondescript particular location, but it's in the southernmost island. Maybe I shouldn't reveal exactly where. I don't think it's necessary. I'm paranoid, but it usually
Do you think someone's going to track you down?
I'm a little paranoid, but it usually never hurts to be a little paranoid.
Yeah, I agree
Uh,
with that, actually, especially
so
where I am.
yeah. So what's been going on there lately? I don't want to get too involved in politics or anything, but sounds like there have been some issues.
Right. Well, what I will say is it's not something that's restricted actually to politics. I mean, I think there are elements in the world that see it as mere politics, but what's happening here is really anything but politics. It's a lot deeper than that. But
Yeah.
um, but I understand, why in the wider world it might be seen as such. But we can get into that at some other point. I mean, it's the issues are very, very complicated. But what I did want
Yeah.
to talk to you about very quickly was you had mentioned uh, the Jerusalem complex
Yeah.
earlier today. And I thought it was very fitting that we talk about that, being as it is that I'm standing right now in Jerusalem. Do you care to
Yeah.
explain to our audience, the Pandora Knots, for those of you who do not know, what
Well, what's Jerusalem
Jerusalem complex
syndrome?
refers to?
Let's
Oh, a
see.
syndrome, excuse me.
What
It
is
could be a complex, but yeah, you're
it's a
right. Syndrome.
well, let's see. I suppose Google will give me AI about Jerusalem syndrome.
Hey,
We can talk about AI. Jerusalem syndrome is, oh, I'm reading from the assistant, from the AI assistant. Jerusalem syndrome is a group of mental phenomena that can occur when individuals visit Jerusalem, often characterized by intense religious themes and experiences. It can affect people from various religious backgrounds and may lead to temporary psychosis, typically resolving after leaving the city. So that's pretty funny that it's just specific to that city. Well, I understand how that could be, though. But the next question comes up then, aren't all religious experiences kind of a temporary psychosis? That might
I mean,
sound insulting to religious people, but but it has to be asked. What's the difference between Jerusalem syndrome being religious psychosis versus someone having a religious experience at all?
right. Well, I was actually thinking about this earlier this week about clearly there is some sort of difference between hallucinations and delusions on the one hand and religious experiences or faith experiences on the other. Now, there probably is a certain amount of overlap, but they're definitely not the same thing because
Hmm.
I mean, let's see. If you have a hallucination, or you're experiencing delusions, it's generally not related to a very specific aspect that defines a faith experience, which is religiosity.
Okay.
And and I think one of the major aspects is that even if you have hallucinations or delusions, Um, I don't know. I think that you have episodes very frequently, but with a religious experience, it tends to be, I mean, if you're a religious person, it tends to be sustained over a very long period of time
Hmm.
with no real break period. I mean, this is an interesting question. I mean, I suppose you could have completely sustained hallucinations or delusions. I mean, obviously, there are such things as sustained delusions. Sustained uh, hallucinations, though, I mean, truly, like, could you have a hallucination that lasts without interruption for years?
I guess there, see, that would be impossible to differentiate from somebody who is just delusional, isn't it? Well, or
I
by
mean,
hallucination, do you
they're,
mean
they're
somebody who actually has a sensory experience that's hallucinatory?
I mean, honestly, it depends on how we define hallucination and how we define delusion, because these
Yeah.
terms are actually not as scientific as they sometimes sound
Well, I think
to
hallucination
people.
is sensory and delusion has to do with beliefs.
But the question, of
Typically.
course, is how do you differentiate a normal baseline set of perceptions from a hallucination in a single
Oh.
individual person? Because
Well, if you see and hear things that aren't there, that's a hallucination. Right?
yeah, but now we're getting into philosophy, because it's then a question of whether or not there's such thing as seeing as there, and if there's really such a thing as something being there or not
Are you having
objectively.
Jerusalem syndrome? You're getting awfully deep.
Well, I've been here for so many years that I don't. That's why I ask: Am I so deep in the syndrome that I can't
You
even
could be.
distinguish it from
You
from
know,
from my own daily life?
I'd like to have me some Jerusalem syndrome or some kind of religious experience. That sounds pretty nice because at least you would be driven by something so much that you would know what to do. You see, that's the envy I have of religious people, even if they're having some kind of psychosis or syndrome, or it seems like they're not acting in their best interests or something. It's like at least you guys are driven to do something. Like the guy who wrote Temple OS took him
Right.
years. He writing this
Yeah.
computer code all at the
Yeah. Very
at
interesting guy.
the
Yeah.
at the basically the bare as close to the bare metal chip as you can get, and he wrote this thing from the ground up, and
Yeah.
it's really a digital
Fascinating case.
work of software engineering like you would not believe. And the
Yeah.
guy was eccentric as heck, but
Yeah.
and he didn't get anywhere with it. I think he's deceased now, but it's like that's the thing that I'm jealous of.
Yeah.
I
It's
wish
he's famous.
something could drive me that hard that at least, it kind of reminds me like back in the days when I thought that I was going to get a good job. I thought that I was going to get a hot job. That probably felt pretty good. I mean that did feel pretty good. I guess what I'm wishing for is a way to feel driven and good. That's what's lacking, you see? And I don't know how to get it, but I do have copes. There are copes and things and mechanisms you can use, defense mechanisms and so forth. Like I have been thrilled lately to hear about the layoffs because especially in the tech sector, because and jobs being taken over by I love because I feel that it absolves us all. And what I'm thinking is these people should not be, well, it absolves the
Talk about
jobs.
Jerusalem syndrome.
It absolves the jobless though, because you see,
So,
these people who are worried, well, we all could use a little absolvation.
absolution.
What do you call it? Abolition, absolute. We could all use
Absolution.
we could all use some of that because it's so easy to just be blamed for being a loser. So my point is, um, these people who are losing who are afraid of losing their jobs to AI, I'm like, hey man, bring it on. If you can be replaced by AI, you then have the perfect excuse for not having a job. You really do. I would welcome that because you know the one thing about not having a job is that you don't have to do it anymore. See, that's the thing. People forget, people who have jobs and want jobs and keep doing jobs, they forget they forget the cost to themselves of doing the work. You see, and they it's almost like they confuse revenue with profits. No, you have to subtract expenses from revenue, then you get your profit. But they don't ever count the cost to themselves of doing the work. You see,
Of
so
course.
so what because everybody's got to have a job, right? That brings up another interesting point. I found a sermon the other day. It was Billy Graham saying Jesus never told anyone to go out and get a job. He never did. So I know you're not a follower, but I'm sure that must has some meaning in your faith as well. So anyway, I'll wrap this up in just a second. I think my point is that you know as much as I admire people who are see that's probably what it is. People love their jobs for the same reason I was saying I envy people with a religious kind of psychosis or delusion, even because at least they're driven. At least they know what to do. You see, even if they struggle with typical things in life, even if they struggle with basic things in life, at least they're driven, even if by a religious psychosis. That would be beautiful experience in many ways. I,
Yeah.
I'm just on the fence. Like if you asked me if I wanted it or not, it would be like coin toss. I don't know. I envy it.
It,
Okay.
it's very difficult, I have to say, being a scientific person of the future and reconciling that with some sort of religiosity of a more traditional variety. It's a challenge, even though in reality, there doesn't actually have to be much of a needed reconciliation because there are, a number of religions that are pretty well reconciled, I would say, to science, despite contrary popular belief. Um, and the reality also, too, is that much of modern science essentially was, we'll say, discovered or was scaffolded on the back of religion in the last few millennia and centuries. It doesn't
Oh,
mean that it's dependent thereon, but what I mean is that we do have to, give credit where credit is due. That you've had many famous theologians in history who were also essentially natural scientists,
mhm.
botanists, um, zoologists, astronomers, etc. The list goes on and on and on. And
Mhm.
part of it was just is that there was simply no choice. I mean, there was a time in the past where the most educated thing that you could possibly be, for the most part, was a member of the clergy in medieval Europe. That was about as high up as you could
Well,
get
I think that's coming back.
academically.
Gen Z is religiosity, and Gen Z is rising. I envy that. So, yeah.
The only thing, but about Gen Z, I wonder what their, I wonder, what the average concept of religion or religiosity is for them, because I
Oh,
feel like
but
the generational
I
gap.
like me some Gen Z. I like a lot of things about Gen Z, including the religious rise.
It's
No.
interesting, but I mean, I'm wondering how different their conception of religion is from previous generations, because it may look on the surface like it's tapping into something that you would feel is similar or somehow akin to your own feelings or beliefs. And yet it may be that their conception of it is so vastly different, but it's only under the same name that you've been duped.
Oh,
So I'm wondering,
oh. But I think it's aren't all religions like that? You never really know exactly what somebody else believes, even
of
in your
course, yeah,
own
that's absolutely the case.
congregation. And there's so
It's
much
absolutely the case.
fighting, there's so much infighting even between branches that should be very similar. So yeah, I can see how
Probably
generationally,
human nature, yeah. I mean, it is human nature for sure. Yeah.
yeah, generationally there would be some kind of gap between the religiosity of the Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and certainly the boomers, and then the greats before them. But but I bet when there's a rise of religiosity, you can there are parallels. Whenever religiosity is rising, there are probably common motives, I would suspect, as to why the tide is turning in that way. What
Well,
makes
I mean,
generations religious?
one thing that, one thing, sorry to interrupt you, Paul, but one thing that's also happening in Gen Z as well is an extreme rise in anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Extreme. Um, we're talking about, in figures of, depending on the sector, but like between 1 and 500% in
Uh,
the last 2 years, which obviously has to
see,
do to
but
some
why?
degree with things that have
Why?
happened in Israel and nearby territories since 2023, and how they're interpreted by certain sectors. But on the other hand, it also was preceding 2023, as shown by polls and other data sets that anybody has immediate access to. Although I would really urge people to be very careful about these various data sets. You have to really make sure you have a professional eye when you're looking at different data
Mhm.
sets with regard to hot button topics such as these, because unfortunately there's a fair amount of manipulation and disinformation, and
Yeah.
misinformation too,
But see,
propaganda and agitprop. So you do
instead
have
of
to be really sensitive to that.
being concerned about the rise in it, I mean, that's worrisome in itself, but I'm also concerned about why. Like, why in the first place?
But what I'm saying is, it's interesting that you have a rise in religiosity and in anti-Semitism
Yeah.
around the same time.
Well, I mean, well, actually, that in some way that does make sense. You can make it make sense. I mean, because
Well, I mean,
it's
it's
just,
not just that. It's also, if you look at the history, I mean, it depends on what we mean by religiosity. But if we're talking about some of the major religions, with large representations, large demographic representations on in around the globe, then if you look at history very cursorily, it's quite clear that there's a long tradition of anti-Semitism within a number of major religions on the earth. And so if
mm,
there is a rise in religiosity now in any one of those chosen religions, it's no surprise that anti Semitism would come along with it. Now, I realize I may be offending people by saying this, but I'm afraid in this case, the offense doesn't matter, because this is the historical reality. I mean, the information is all there, that demonstrates exactly the point that I'm saying, and it is incontestable.
well, I just don't see why people bother. I guess in some sense, then there, there is lack of drive can also be a good thing then because you just don't even have the drive to bother with these it just becomes kind of baffling to me.
Well, that's the thing. I think for some people though, what we call in Hebrew sinat chinam or sinat chinam, it means it's hard to explain, but it basically means how could I translate this to English? It's something like um, irrational hate or just completely uh, unleashed, unabashed, unqualified, reasonless, irrational hate.
Yeah,
And
it's baffling.
but
But
it's baffling, and yet you and I are talking about the like beatific experience of a religious epiphany or of a belief of a religious experience or a delusion or a hallucination or whatever you want to call it.
you know,
And the thing is that when a person hates with this
mm,
level of irrational ecstasy, even if it's hate, they feel this sort of perverse glee
I get
in the
it.
hate.
Yeah, that's I see.
And so that in
I
itself
see what you
becomes
mean.
a kind of religious
Yeah.
experience
Oh,
for them.
okay. I guess what's most baffling about it is that from the outside, it seems to be torturous to the experiencer, to be hateful.
Right,
But
right.
from the inside, they get a charge out of it. They enjoy it. I see.
Exactly.
Or at
It's
least
orgasmic.
maybe they just like the energy of it. It's energizing. Maybe that's it. That's why it's
And
baffling. But
and the thing is, you also get a huge high from limerence or even from love. And
yeah,
yet, it is much harder to love than it is to hate. Hate is actually quite straightforward,
that's
and
weird.
love
I find it harder
is
to
rather
hate.
counterintuitive. And
I
and
mean,
so
I
I
would
think,
like I at least I would like to think about myself that I find it harder to hate, but
well,
maybe
you would like
but
to
maybe I've
you would
learned.
like to think so, but objectively speaking, in terms of what the human brain is more easily capable of,
I guess
it
you're
would
right.
seem that the hate is the easier route. And so if you are presented with that choice that you can
Yeah.
either love or you can hate,
I guess
it's much easier.
I do have
But listen,
experiences of hate.
it's the path of least resistance, Paul. Because
Well,
if you're presented with this dual
well,
path of love or hate, the path of least resistance is in fact hate. And
and
it
the
takes
most
more exertion to love.
I guess it would be the most instantly gratifying to hate because then you don't have
Yes,
to do
that's
anything.
exactly right
You
too.
stop and you know everything already, and you know enough to hate already, and then it glorifies the
You have to
self.
learn how to love, but you don't have to learn how to hate.
I don't. That sounds
It sounds
antithetical to
absurd.
humans being
It
loving.
sounds like a Hallmark card.
It sounds
Well,
like
not quite a
humans.
Hallmark card.
It sounds like it should be our nature to love, and then we would have to be corrupted to hate.
Well, but that's
I,
like a religious tenet. I don't know. I don't think
I
that's
don't.
necessarily true of.
It's it's
I mean,
confusing.
I think that's what we want humanity to become, that we want it to get to that place. But I don't know if that's the natural state.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I wanted to bring up with regards to a hallucination is that epileptic people. I've listened to some brain researcher talk about this, talking about epileptics and also relating it to brains that have been probed by a single electrode and asking the people what they're experiencing. And they found that basically, okay, this guy was arguing that most of human intellect does not exist in the brain simply because they have never triggered abstract complex thought with an electrode. I have my own argument. I mean, this was a doctor, like who'd done surgeries thousands of times, a very experienced doctor who was trying to argue that much of consciousness and the intellect is not in the brain. I think he was
What,
misled.
what,
I think he was misled
no,
though, because an electrode cannot pass on complex patterns of information that may be required
right.
to
So
invoke abstract
wait, so
information.
what is he arguing then? So
Well,
he's saying
he
that
was
it
basically
does.
saying that because an epileptic and someone being having their brain probed has never had, for example, a mathematical seizure or suddenly have a philosophical thought when probed. So basically, he was saying, based on epileptic studies and electrodes on the brain studies, he was saying that the brain contains sensations, feelings, emotions, memories, maybe just a lot of very basic things can be invoked with an electrode. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, but
But
okay,
so
but I
where
think,
is
oh,
consciousness?
but okay, this is the main key here that relates this. Religious experience can be invoked at the base level by raw stimulation of the brain. It doesn't require any
That's right.
complex thought.
That's correct. That's correct.
So,
So,
so that's
yeah,
interesting
but
because,
see, I don't know who this supposed doctor is. I mean,
I
I
forget
presume
to look him up.
that he is a doctor, but I mean, I haven't seen what his actual claim is. But what I will say is I think it contradicts the grand majority of mainstream views about the brain and consciousness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for some reason he thought that if it's in the brain, it must be invocable by electrode, and he never budged from that. It doesn't make sense though,
I
because
mean,
for
it's
example, when I speak to you, do my words somehow all just translate into a single firing of a at a single point? No, no, there's a complex
no, I mean,
pattern.
in essence that's a religious belief. That's not a scientific belief.
Yeah. So
I mean,
basically, he
it
thought that
sounds
if it was
it
in the
sounds
brain, you could get it with an
it,
electron.
it sounds like a hallucination.
Yeah, it sounds baseless. All it means is that
I mean,
invoking things
I
in the
mean, I
brain
mean,
takes more than an electrode.
I mean, the thing is, maybe I'm completely the fool, and I simply don't understand such a wildly intellectual belief system. But from my limited understanding of what this guy is claiming, based on what you've told me, there's nothing really convincing that I've thus far heard in this that makes this theory seem convincing in the least. I mean, it doesn't even make
Well,
sense.
well,
although,
well,
although
well,
I will
but I do believe his
that
data
that's not a
though.
good measure because
I do believe
because
his data.
ultimately scientific truths are counterintuitive, so it doesn't always have to make initial sense. But in this case, there's nothing that really supports the claim unless I haven't been presented with that information that supports it. But it doesn't
Well,
it doesn't sound.
his data made sense, meaning that the
No, but I
things
don't
that
understand.
they've
I don't
ever
understand how is it a lecture?
what
It's completely, because the thing is we already have mountains of evidence in terms of in even layman's neuroscience
yeah.
about the probable connection between uh you know neurons and synaptic firings and act. It's a I won't get into all that, of course. I'm sure that our viewers probably have some knowledge of it, but we already have a pretty relatively decent grasp at this point that there's probably some kind of relationship between that and what we generally refer to as consciousness. Now, we don't actually have proof at this
Oh yeah.
point,
Yeah.
but we're sort of on that trajectory.
Oh
Now,
yeah,
I don't
sure,
really
sure.
get what this guy is
Yeah.
suggesting,
Yeah, no, no, you're right. There's
but
substantial data about the correlates between brain activity and
yeah,
states
it's
of
correlation
consciousness.
exactly. Yeah,
There's a
it's
correlation,
it's correlative
but
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 not
but
causative.
the main thing that he
Yeah,
was
or we
bringing
haven't
up was
established a causative.
the main thing
Yeah,
that
you're
he
right.
was bringing up was the impossibility of invoking through seizure or electrode complex abstract patterns of mathematical or philosophical thought. But I do find it interesting that
Okay.
religiosity, epileptics often will have a religious fervor about them, especially invoked during episodes.
Yeah, that's
So
also documented. So I don't know
yeah. So
what he's
what
on about exactly.
but what's interesting to me then is that why religiosity seems to be invocable in the brain, whereas you can't force someone, to take a pill or to be stimulated in the brain to become a philosopher or to start having philosophical thoughts or start doing math problems or
You
something.
may be able to. You may be able
Well,
to. It's just that we don't
well,
know how.
what
I
he
mean,
did,
and
well,
the
he
reason
went
I
through,
say that is
he
because
cited thousands and
there are
thousands of
no.
data points where
Well,
it was impossible to
well,
do it.
hold on, Paul. But there are a number of cases where accidentally, a small number of people, at least on record, who experienced major traumas, physical traumas, um, essentially woke up with unbelievable
Yeah,
abilities that they did not have
savants.
previously. So
Yeah, a guy gets
I'm
hit in
sure,
the head by a
yeah,
baseball, can play the
basically
piano.
it's a type of savantism, but I mean not to be confused with savant syndrome, which is basically people who are who are autistic in some degree, but then they also concomitantly have savant syndrome, which is rather rare within people who have autism or who have been diagnosed therewith. But even though that's a whole other issue we can get into because there's a complete overdiagnosis, in my opinion, and I'll explain why on another occasion, hopefully. But I think it's actually confused with a number of other possible conditions or syndrome. Not well. We'll say. See, I'll have to explain in depth later my opinion about that. But we have a separate situation where people who have experienced major physical trauma, especially to the brain, on rare occasions, extremely rare occasions, wake up with exquisite abilities in mathematics or in geometry,
It
in the
has,
arts,
yeah.
visual
Okay,
arts,
it has happened.
music.
Yes, yes. So,
And
but the
and
argument
so,
was though that that
but
was with an
Paul,
intact brain. See, that was not invocable
I
in electric.
know, but the reason I'm saying this though is in this case it happened accidentally. It's sort of like in primitive times, cavemen would have had access to fire accidentally through happenstance because they're standing in a field, they don't know how to make fire by themselves, but all of a sudden, hallelujah, you know, lightning comes down, strikes a tree. Oh my gosh, we have fire. You grab a stick. I have a torch. Now I can start a fire. But
Yeah.
you don't know how to actually make it yourself. And so you have access to this amazing futuristic phenomenon. You have control over fire all of a sudden, but you don't yet know how to make it yourself via precision maneuvers with your
Yeah.
own human hand. Now,
Yeah.
that could be similar to this, that you have guys who
Yeah.
accidentally get hit in the
Right.
head and wake
See,
up
I
as
think,
math geniuses. And we don't know what the mechanism is yet because it's like
yeah,
a freak lightning strike. But
that's a
it
good
may be
counter
that in the
argument.
future,
That's a good
it
counter
may
argument.
be it may be
I'm
that in the
surprised.
future we will know what the mechanism is, and then we can basically bop somebody in the head and know that they will wake up a math genius based on that precision maneuver.
Yeah, if it's in there. Yeah.
If it's in there.
It's
I mean, because
apparently it was
obviously
inhibited.
obviously it's possible because these people were hit in the nothing changed in their brain, nothing was added to the brain per se. I mean, the structure was altered somehow.
Yeah, I see.
Uh,
So I'm surprised
but
he didn't mention
it's
the
not like I put a new lobe into their brain or that I added
right,
cells.
right,
You
right.
know,
You removed the inhibition. But
That's part of it.
that's
That's part
not
of it, but
really that
that's
surprising.
not all of it, because
Well,
because drinking alcohol also
yeah,
disinhibits you, but that doesn't
that's
make you a
the
math
yeah. I
genius.
mean, alcohol is the drug most commonly associated with inhibition, but
Disinhibition.
well, disinhibition. Um, but on the other hand, alcohol through its disinhibition doesn't enhance behavior to be better.
Well, it
Most
can. I mean,
people
it
act
depends on
worse,
the. I
but
mean,
in
it depends on
total,
what we call enhance, because I mean, you can say for
intellectually,
sure that many writers and
yeah, yeah,
uh,
okay,
many writers and artists have,
I hear that.
swear by the use of alcohol
I hear.
and other substances. And I myself, in my own history as an artist and a writer, have at times sworn uh, by the miraculous helping powers
Yeah.
this of
Well,
this assistant. But
yeah.
I will say that since I have pulled away from that, I have still found that I'm able to be what I consider to be a successful type of writer or artist, even though I've switched my assistants, uh, and
Um,
I've drawn away from that particular assistant,
I see.
alcohol that is, and but now part of it, of course, is simply something that you might call it something that's similar to placebo effect, that you think that it's helping you, and because you believe it is making you a better writer, it actually kind of does. But whether it actually of its own powers is making you a better writer, maybe not. I mean, we can say that certainly it disinhibits you, but does that necessarily make you a better writer? I think it makes you a different
Well,
kind of writer than you would otherwise be, but it
there are
doesn't necessarily make
yeah,
you better.
there are plenty of writers who
And
don't drink. Like,
right,
and
exactly.
but you usually know who those are. Like typically, don't you think you would know this guy could not have been a drunkard while writing, you know?
I don't know. I don't know, because I look at my writing from the time that I partook far more, and I look at the writing that I've done outside of that influence. And I think in some cases, what I have done, quote, sober is even more bizarre. Not bizarre, but even more. I mean, there are connections that I don't know. Even what I have been able to have made those under the influence, I'm not sure. I mean, I would have told you the opposite, Paul, in the past, but now it's partly because I've also adopted. I mean, it sounds like such
Oh,
a
we
stupid
have less than a minute,
self-help
less than a
guru
minute
kind
left.
of thing,
Let Less than a minute.
but being high on life, I swear, in some ways, is more effective.
Oh, well, of course. Yeah. I mean, there there's something very inhibitory about, maybe it's our culture or something, where alcohol will indeed help people in many situations. Let's try to bookmark
Yeah.
this here, and we'll get back. Maybe we have to wait 10 minutes or something because because of the free trial. All right, Pandora Knots, we'll be back with
Oh, is it
another.
ending?
Yes, we'll be back
Yes.
with another episode in just a minute. Uh,
Oh, actually, Paul, I'm afraid that I have
yes.
to leave Jerusalem. I have to catch a bus south
Okay.
or north.
Okay.